This is the instructional video for Unit 1, Outcome 2. We are going to look at the relationship between fractions, decimals, and percents. We're going to start with the relationship between a fraction and a percent. And this is the easiest place to start. The word percent means out of 100. So if you have a fraction like our first example, 50 out of 100, you have the answer in your numerator. 50 out of 100 means 50%. In our next example, the denominator is not 100. However, 25 is a factor of 100. What that means is we can take this fraction of 9 over 25 and turn it into an equivalent fraction out of 100. We need to know the relationship between 25 and 100. We are multiplying by 4. And to make sure our fraction is equivalent, we have to multiply the numerator by 4 as well. 9 times 4 gives us 36. So now that we have our fraction out of 100, it's easy to turn this into a percent. 36 out of 100 is equal to 36%. Example number 3 is a little bit harder. When you look at the number 60, that is not a factor of 100. However, if you take a very close look at this fraction, hopefully you can recognize it is not in lowest terms. Both the numerator and the denominator have a common factor of 3. And so we're going to divide each of these two numbers by 3. 33 divided by 3 gives us 11, and 60 divided by 3 is 20. Now our denominator is a factor of 100. So in our next step, we can make an equivalent fraction with 100 as the denominator. We're going from 20 to 100, so we're multiplying by 5. We need to multiply 11 times 5 to keep this equivalent, and that would give us 55. So there we go. That's what we're looking for. We have our denominator of 100. 55 out of 100 means 55%. In the next example, this is the hardest kind of fraction to turn into a percent. We have a denominator of 8. This is not a factor of 100, and we can't make an equivalent fraction to get a situation where the denominator is a factor of 100. Our only option is long division. So 3 divided by 8, if we set this up in long division, is going to look just like this. We're going to say 8 divides into 3. Now we know that 8 is larger than 3, so it can't even go in one time. So a good place to get going here is to give ourselves a decimal and a few zeros. We know we're going to need these. Now up here above the 3, we're going to put a 0 because 8 goes into 3 0 times. When we do long division with decimals, we always line up these decimals. And so now let's get going with our long division. We're going to try and divide 8 into 30 now. Now 8 does go into 30 3 times. We multiply the 3 by the 8 to get 24. And we do some subtraction. We get a difference of 6. All right, well, let's bring down the next 0, make this 60, and repeat those steps. 8 goes into 60 7 times, and then we multiply again. 7 times 8 is 56. Again, let's subtract and see what we're left with. We have 4. All right, well, let's bring down that next 0 to make 40. And again, do some division. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40, so that's what we're looking for. We have a terminating decimal, and that gives us our answer as a decimal, not a percent. So we'll start off just by writing out 0.375. Now we are going to come up to this concept later on in this lesson. When we go from a decimal to a percent, we just multiply our decimal value by 100. So what that means is the decimal is going to go 2 places to the right. It's going to end up in between the 7 and the 5. So that tells us what the percent is. 0.375 is the same as 37.5%. Moving on, we're going to change a percent to a fraction. Well, like in the previous lesson when we went from a fraction to a percent, we know that percent means out of 100. So if we have 43%, the easiest thing to do is to make this a fraction out of 100. That is the easiest type of question. In the next example here, we have 85%. Now it starts off fairly similar in that we're just going to write this over 100. But before we move on, we should understand that all fractions should be in lowest terms. Have a careful look at your numerator and your denominator. Hopefully it's pretty clear they both can be divided by 5, or they have a common factor of 5. Now, we'll start with the denominator. That's a little bit easier. 100 divided by 5 gives us 20. You know, you might want to do some long division with this one or whatever method works for you, but be careful with these ones. 5 into 85, or 85 divided by 5, that's going to be 17. And so now, before we move on, just double check, are we in lowest terms? Yes, we are. So that's our final answer. Here we have 125%. Now just remember, percent means out of 100. So we have 125 out of 100. All right, well this again is not in lowest terms. You're looking at both your numerator and your denominator, and you're trying to figure out, you know, what's the greatest common factor, ideally, or any common factor, and you can keep reducing. In this case, we're going to go to the greatest common factor, which is 25. 125 divided by 25 is 5. And 100 divided by 25 is 4. Now, we're kind of done here. We are in lowest terms, but hopefully we remember that this kind of fraction is called improper. Our numerator should not be bigger than the denominator. And so we just want to go ahead and change this into a proper mixed fraction of 1 1/4. Now let's talk about converting a percent to a decimal. Again, probably one of the easier concepts here. There's a few ways to do this. You could change this to 35 out of 100. So you could put it into a fraction form if you like. And then you could remember that 35 out of 100 is the same as 35 divided by 100. And when we divide by 100, we're going to be dividing by 10 and dividing by 10 again. And that decimal is going to end up in front of the 3. Now that's one method. A lot of students will use that, and that's just fine, and you should know that. But the easier way to do this is just to remember, when we go from a percent to a decimal, we're going to be taking that decimal where it currently is. In this case, in 8%, the decimal is here. We're going to move it 1, 2 places to the left. Now, if there is nothing in front of your number, you would put a 0 there. And then this is where the decimal ends up. We need a 0 in this units place. And where the decimal began, it's no longer there. And so 8% is the same as 0.08. I prefer that method. It's quick, it's easy, and it works every time. So if we apply it to this example here, 145%, here's where the decimal currently is. It's after the 5. And then we're just going to go 1, 2. Move it 2 places over. Now it's right there. 1.45. Simple as that. All right, moving on. Decimal to a percent. So now we're just going the other way around. When we go from a decimal to a percent, we are going to take the decimal where it currently is in its decimal form. We're going to go 1, 2 positions to the right. Now that decimal is going to end up after the 6. So now 0.46 can be written as 46%. Okay, we'll do the same thing here. 1, 2 positions, 0.08, that's 8%. Well, now in front of the decimal, we have a number other than 0, but we still do the same steps. We're going to, I'll just come down here. We're going to take this decimal where it currently is, in between the 2 and the 5, we're going to move it 1, 2 positions. the decimal ends up here. Well, because we moved another space, we need to put a 0 right there, and we'll erase where that decimal began. And so you can see the answer 250 or 250%. All right, so that's how we go from a decimal to a percent. Now we're going to go from a decimal to a fraction. Here, what we need to be able to do is either rely on understanding the proper terminology for these place values, or just be able to count how many decimal places we have. So let's start with the first method. You know, early on in middle school, we should have learned that this place value here, where we see the 6, that's the tenths place value. And then here where we see the 5, that's the hundredths place value. And you should have written these out and practiced saying these. This can be read 0.65, or the proper way to say this is 65 hundredths. Now, if we were going to write down 65 hundredths, it looks like this, 65 over 100. Now, like with previous examples, we should go and we should put this into lowest terms, right? So we're going to divide both of these by 5 and get 13 out of 20. I don't mind that method, you know, tenths, hundredths, thousandths, that works. I think it's easier though just to count your decimal places. We have 1, 2 decimal places here. That means our denominator will have 2 zeros. 2 decimal places, 2 zeros. As simple as that. Then you take your value and that's your numerator. So 0.04 is equal to 4 out of 100, or 4 hundredths. Again, this is not in lowest terms. Both 4 and 100 can be divided by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. Lowest term fraction is 1 over 25. All right, so now let's take a look at this example. If we were to read this, we could say 3.2 or 3.2, or we could say 3 and 2/10. We could also look at the fact that the decimal is just 1 decimal place. So we have a whole number of 3, because it's 3 and 2/10, and then we end up creating this mixed fraction like this, 3 and 2/10. Before we move on, are we in lowest terms? Again, we're not, so we're going to take 2/10 and reduce this. They can both be divided by 2, and so we end up with 3 and 1 over 5. All right, next up, we're going from a fraction to a decimal. And so there are a few ways you can do this. A lot of students will go through a percent to get to a decimal. That's pretty smart. And so let's look at that method here. 85 over 100, or 85 out of 100, is equal to 85%. And as we just saw a few minutes ago, when we go from percent to a decimal, we're going to go and move that decimal where it currently is 2 positions to the left, and so we get 0.85. Okay, in these examples here, you know, quick glance, we see our denominators are not 100, but can we make an equivalent fraction out of 100? In this example, fairly straightforward, 25 is a factor of 100, and so we can make an equivalent fraction there. And we're going to take 13 and multiply it by 4, because we had to go and multiply 25 by 4 to get 100. So 13 times 4 is going to give us 52. Now 52 over 100, we could go ahead and change that to a percent, or we can just go straight to 0.52. Remember, a fraction is like division, and 52 divided by 100 tells us we're going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. Here's a little bit of a harder one. We have 12 over 15. Again, it looks like, you know, it's not going to be possible. 15 is not a factor of 100, but always look at your fractions. This fraction is not in lowest terms. Both the numbers 12 and 15 can be divided by 3. So if we divide them both by 3, we're going to get a 4 for our numerator and a 5 for the denominator. Now we have a denominator that is a factor of 100. So we're going to make an equivalent fraction here. When we go from 5 to 100, we're multiplying by 20. Multiply 4 by 20 to get 80. 80 over 100 is 80%, so you could use that method. Or, if we're dividing by 100 and we have the number 80, we're going to take that decimal, move it 2 places to the left, and we get 0.8. Here's a challenging one. Again, you take a look at your fraction. Our denominator, here in this case 6, it's not a factor of 100, and we can't make an equivalent fraction to get that denominator to be a factor of 100. And so once again, what we're going to do is do some long division, right? 5 divided by 6 in long division looks like this. How many times can 6 go into 5? Well, again, let's give ourselves a decimal and some zeros to work with here. And we're going to put a 0 on top of the 5 just to make sure we don't accidentally put a number up there. We know that 6 goes into 5 0 times. And so now we're going to consider the 50. How many times can 6 go into 50? Well, that would be 8. 6 times 8 gives us 48. Subtract, we're left with 2. So we're going to bring down this 0 to make 20, and we continue on. 6 goes into 20 3 times. 3 times 6 is 18. We subtract, and look what happens. We have another 2. We're going to bring down this 0, and we're going to get 20 again. And if we were to continue this, we'll see that we're going to start to have some deja vu here, because every time we do this, we get a 2 for our difference. And if I were to put another 0 and bring it down, it's going to be 20. At this point here, we can confirm this 3 is repeating, and it will repeat forever. And so when we write this out as a decimal, we would say this is equal to 0.83. And then on top of the 3, we put this little bar here to show that that will repeat forever and ever. And that is the exact decimal value of the fraction 5 over 6. All right, there's a lot here. You can go obviously and watch this as many times as you need to, go forward and back. Good luck.